and think, and thinking, oh, I don't know what to do with this. This is rather strange. And even thinking, yeah, that maybe somebody heard wrongly, and they recorded this. And they had so much respect, for what was recorded that they weren't going to go follow up and say, wait, did somebody hear wrong? But now, maybe getting older, and in this slight context, in this small context, perhaps getting older and getting a little wiser, I get in a very direct way that in samsara is the body that wanders and not the mind. There's no easy logical way, to explain that. But it's like a lived experience. If we want to logically explain, we could say, you could say that, yes, although it is the mind, but the mind itself, if it is not in conjunction with the body, and then the mind itself, which in other contexts we also call mind itself, we also call nature of mind. And nature of mind, there is no samsara. There is no confused existence. There's no wandering on. But when the mind in conjunction with the body, then it experiences what it experiences. And since we are under the power of confusion, then mostly what we experience is the sufferings that are involved in this wandering on, in this wandering on, in this cycle of birth and death. So the statement is not saying, it's the body literally that continues or that wanders. But it is with the burden of the body, then these experiences of suffering and dissatisfaction and pain and so on and so forth arises. So in confused existence is the body that wanders, the body and its demands. And so this throws some insight into one of the chief, said to be one of the chief distinguishing characteristics of Vajrayana level of the path. Tibetan Buddhism says that the complete Buddhist path consists of 3 levels. And these 3 levels are not, we call it level, but they're not exactly consecutive. It's not like, first you go to kindergarten for a number of years, and then, you go to, grade 1 to 12, and then you go to university. They're not levels like that. They are 3, although they are often spoken of as levels, as if they are progressed on in that way, in a linear way, but they're not really. There may be, you could say better that there are 3 kind of concentric circles whereby you have the outer, then you have the inner, then you have the innermost that is often called secret. Secret in that sense, it's hidden. Not secret as in, I have a secret, I'm not sharing it with you secret. So the outer level is the level, or the outer circle is the circle of, you could say, the lesser vehicle. It's lesser in the sense of its focus is on your own situation, your own condition. So its focus is lesser. Then the next circle, the inner, is the great vehicle, the common great vehicle, which then the focus goes from self to other. Then the innermost, called the Vajrayana, is the uncommon great vehicle, also called the Vajrayana, and that is where the self and other is realized as non-dual. And on that level, one of the most distinct methods of practicing is the method of what's known as deity yoga. Deity yoga is when we train to not identify this body and mind to be I, but rather to identify with what we call pure form of a Buddha. And in this context, in Vajrayana, Buddhas can be male, female, sometimes even neither male nor female. Can be more or less human, or a combination of human and other animals, in fact. So these deities that are also called idams, you identify with one of them and transform your body, mind, transform your experience of your body and mind from your experience based on this flesh and body, flesh and blood body, and the mind associated with it, and instead have your sense of I arise in relation to these Buddha forms, these divine forms. And so the statement, that in samsara is the body that wanders, meaning this ordinary body. And so it gives some insight also to the Vajrayana practice of deity yoga, where you quite intentionally de-link your concept of I with this body especially, and connect your concept of I with the body, with the form of a Buddha. Whether it's the Buddha Tara, which is expressed in feminine form, or the Buddha Vajrapani, which is expressed in a very, kind of muscular, macho, male form, or the more familiar, form of Buddha Shakyamuni. So you identify with that form, that body, your sense of I. And in identifying with that form, that kind of special form, special body, then mind also changes. So rather than the confused mind, and the confused mind under the power of attachment, aversion, and all the faults that this chapter of Bodhicayyavatara that you all have been looking at, how patience is an antidote to all these mistaken, harmful states of mind. All those are said to be purified, replaced by a new sense of I that is free from those faults. Then both body and mind is transformed or our experience of body and mind is transformed, so that the pure nature, the pristine nature, the divine nature of both body and mind is finally seen face to face. It's realized. That's what we call the initial awakening. And then through practicing, through familiarizing over time, we completely dispel any and all obscurations, any and all defilements, until this basic nature is without obscurations. That's what we call Buddhahood. That's what we call being awake, being enlightened. When all these faults are dispelled. Again, chapter 8, this chapter on patience, takes us through a number of these faults and how to apply what it calls patience, kashanti, as an antidote to these defilements. And here, of course, Santideva in this text makes use of reasoning. Reasoning is valued as a particularly helpful mental ability to be used, to be harnessed, to be adopted, to convince ourselves that there is a better way to respond to or to react to these mental defilements when they arise. When mental defilements arise and we don't recognize them for what they are, then we think of them as problems. And then we think of them as problems caused by other people or problems caused by other circumstance. And then when we see them as problems caused by other people primarily, or problems caused by other circumstance, when we relate to these mental defilements not as they are, which are mental defilements that arise in our own hearts, in our own minds, but instead we project it outwards and see them as problems that other people bring us, or problems that conditions brought about, then when we fall into that habit, then the result is inevitably what is called suffering. That which we don't like, that which we don't want. So until and unless we can see that behind all the problems that we have, big and small, behind all the problems, underlying all the problems that we have, we think the world has, that underlying all of them is what we call mental defilements, or afflictive emotions, or vexations, or what in Sanskrit is called the kleshas, the emotions that afflict, the emotions that bring suffering, the emotions that bring pain. Only when we see that all the troubles is the trouble of that, these are the mental defilements. And so, chapter on patience, I believe you guys are around 88, 89, somewhere around there, right?
Yeah, we around 89. I mean, that's where we stopped meeting.
Mm-hmm. So this section is particularly addressing what you could call jealousy, you know. Jealousy on the one hand, and on the other hand, the inability to right, to appreciate the good that other people are finding, are experiencing. Like these two kind of go hand in hand, right? Jealousy, you know, not being able to stand other people, good fortune, other people's successes, other people's accomplishments. And if we really think about it, the psychology of that, right, is often based in how we feel about ourselves. Yeah, in a way, you could say it's not even about other people, right? It's a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. And in that sense, then, so this is really important, especially I think in the Western audience, American, maybe even like south of the southern. It needs to be made clear, you know, that when you talk about these mental defilements and the way, right, Shantideva speaks, he sort of like teases, if not, you could say, even like appeal to a sense of guilt about, you know, oh, how shameful that you think this way, you behave this way. Oh, you know. But we have to be careful here, given our context, that the way these instructions and teachings work is one of the things assumed in there is that you do not carry around a sense of like self-hate. Sometimes we mistakenly think, you know, this self-hate is like a stepping stone to not being fixated on self. That this self-hate somehow is a requirement to become egoless. But that's not how the Buddha taught as the path, as the process to becoming free from suffering. And so this psychology of this particular psychological baggage, I think is stronger in kind of Western context where there is this sense of like, I don't like myself. Maybe self-hate is too strong. And you say, well, I don't hate myself. But there is this sense of like, I don't like myself. Shantideva's audience, I think, by and large, I wouldn't say they don't have this, but as a cultural pattern, this is not such, there isn't such a baggage culturally of, I don't like myself. So when you read Shantideva, you know, if it feels a little like, oh, he's guilting you, please, you know, kind of translate that in a way that is not going to derail you, you know. Don't take too literally, you know, where he seems, and he's not putting you down. You have to understand that who he was speaking to primarily at that time, right? He was speaking to his fellow monks at this very prestigious institution called Nalanda. Nalanda in ancient India is like, Oxford, Cambridge, in 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 the case of England, the bastion of knowledge, wisdom, well admired, all of that. And so he was speaking to his fellow monks in that place. If anything, they were all, very sure of themselves, very learned. But they were monastics. And Nalanda had non-monastic studying, but primarily it was like, like Oxford and Cambridge in the old days were primarily clergymen, but then others too would participate and study there. But these were fellow monastics. Yeah. So that I think is worth remembering. So let's see before we continue with the verses. Is there anything from last week that maybe some questions or some comments, or even from the week before? Any of these difficult passages that kind of just rubbed you in the wrong way? Which may be the intended effect, So don't immediately think, oh, if it rubs you in the wrong way, then it's not, I'm not hearing it right. Well, sometimes, that's what Santideva is doing. Or you could also raise a question or a comment, for the sake of others. I have a friend that was asking. You could also phrase it that way.
Asking for a
Asking
friend.
for a friend, yes.
I don't remember any verses that gave us a lot of.
Well, I
trouble.
remember, I have in my notes that we were talking about, one question was whether, at the end, tribalism, the idea of seeing other people as not part of your group is part of human nature, or is it a learned phenomena? And are we more like ants and bees who are colony kind of people, creatures? I don't know, so it's hard to, but anyway, we were wrestling with like how much of what we're going through is natural or cultural or both or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Remember the book that I was recommending, Why Buddhism is True?
Yeah. Why Buddhism is true, right?
Yeah. As I always say, title is a little obnoxious, but it's a good book. There, basically, that book is using the background of someone that is, basically looking at a set of Buddhist teachings and practices, and he and this is good. He does it at the beginning of the book. He says, "I'm looking only at a very limited set of Buddhist practices and teachings, so I'm not claiming that everything in Buddhism is what I'm talking about here." Yeah, so he says, "I'm looking at a very limited set of Buddhist teachings and practices, and discussing them and their insights and their value based on," so this is the other side, "based on evolutionary theory, particularly evolutionary psychology. So it's a good book, you know. What the book doesn't do, what the author doesn't do is, as far as I remember, and I've read it, you know, a few times, not cover to cover, but various parts of the book, you know, I've read a few times. What he doesn't do, which I wish he did, was to even come to the conclusion that what Buddhism, or at least the set of teachings and practices that he highlighted, which is the teachings and practices that most of us in the West, if we're attracted to Buddhism, we would say, oh yeah, that's Buddhism. Okay? So it's a set that is well chosen because, you know, that's what most people in the West who are attracted to Buddhism tend to think, right? This is Buddhist practice. This is Buddhist teachings at the core. And I would agree, yeah, it's a well-chosen set of practices and teachings. But what I think he doesn't go far enough is to make the provocative statement that what Buddhism is trying to do is to do the unnatural. The unnatural in evolutionary terms. Meaning, what am I talking about here? The kind of the underlying imperative to continue these genes, you know, by all means, by all cost, right, is in some ways what Buddhist training is trying to stop. Now it does, I hope it is not sounding as, you know, nihilistic as it may sound, because I'm talking about is saying, he gives the example, for example, and he gives, you know, he doesn't go so far. I think maybe he thinks he'll scare people away. But one example he gives is like, he says, you know, like, so this phenomena of road rage, right? You become so angry when someone cuts you off on the highway that you may even pursue this person. And we hear of these cases, you know, pursue the person and actually gun someone down because of road rage, right? And he says that this is basically, right, on the evolutionary, like in that context, this came from a time that we lived in the same village, and we have known everyone in that village for not just now, but several generations. And if somebody does something to encroach on your ability to continue and your family to continue, you have to immediately show them that that's not acceptable and you're not going to put up with it. And so that he is saying, like, the anger that you may demonstrate is not necessarily a destructive anger, because resources are so limited back then. I mean, we tend to forget, you know, until recently, most people's lives are spent in just figuring out, you know, are we going to be hungry or not in the next meal? So it says, given those circumstances, anger has a role from an evolutionary point of view. But 2,500 years ago, when the Buddha appeared, those so-called instincts, those so-called natural responses have become destructive now. And whereas it did serve a purpose, and it did ensure that the human species, you know, comes down to this today or to 2,500 years ago. If we leave those quote unquote instincts, natural instincts unchecked, it will be our undoing. So in that sense, it is natural tribalism, but it's not something that because it is natural that we should sign on to. Natural only in the sense of that it's encoded, in the genetic, kind of blueprint that we have. But we don't need to be so committed to that blueprint.
Well, I think that's going back to where you started, which is it's the body that wanders, not the mind. And so
Yeah, right.
genetic blueprint is the body,
Mm-hmm.
and the mistake is to identify with the body. That's the mistake we're trying to correct,
Yes.
is to think we're only the body, right?
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
I think for the first time today, I realized what you're talking about deity yoga, you're
Mhm.
talking about disembodied beings.
Mm.
I mean, they have a rainbow form. They don't have
Yes.
much,
Yes.
or
So they don't
or-
have this genetic
yeah,
control.
they coding, that's right. Their coding is they're not bound by that at all.
So we're trying to decode, right? All this baggage,
Yeah.
this generational baggage that psychology talks about today, right? Generational trauma, generational guilt, right?
Right.
Mm. How to decode all of that to become free from that. And including in this training, we warn about, now don't mistake, becoming a jerk with becoming a Buddha, right? Oh, I don't care about all this generational trauma, this generational, blah, 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 and mistake being a jerk to being a Buddha. Those are very different. Y'all should just all, like grow up, grow up already. Yeah, so tribalism made a lot of sense, when survival of the tribe, which is not an abstract, wasn't an abstract, right? It was like people living around you. And people living around you, not in the way that is the people living around me today. The truth is, people living around me, I have absolutely no idea what's going on in their lives. We just happen to be accidentally, physically next to each other. If anything, right, at least the way American neighborhoods are, if you stay outside of your house for too much, people start getting a little suspicious. Like desirable neighborhoods is when there are no human beings walking on the sidewalks. But the front porch needs to have immaculate display of the seasons.
But no humans on it.
Yes, and all the windows and all the blinds should be down. Now, to fight for this tribe makes absolutely no sense. But 5,000 years ago, right? To want to fight for your tribe made absolute sense because you are only as strong as your tribe is strong. And if neighboring tribes messed up, right, their planting day, then they may die that season, right? And so they're going to come and take what they need from you. And you don't want to die. You have to fight these people off whatever their intentions, whatever the reasoning behind their intentions. So 5,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, you can see why it's more justifiable, tribalism. But today, you know, these tribes, with technology, these tribes are connecting people that otherwise have no connection except for what's up in their heads. And what's up in the head is just so ephemeral unless you constantly feed it, right? To concretize it into this and that. Once you solidify this into this, once there is a this, there is a that. Then fight.
You know, in terms of like our genetic or what is sort of built in, hardwired into us, you know, it's like, it's clear that happiness wasn't really on the top of the list for us to survive, like happiness. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a really good thing. So it's there, but it's not really top of the list. But if anything, you know, the good news is that we are very pliable. You know, we're very.
For sure.
I've been practicing very poorly for a while, and I have changed.
Oh, come on. Don't put yourself down like that.
Well, no, I mean, that's just
Oh,
like.
you. We don't agree with that statement. Not just praising. Come on.
No, but
We're not saying you're perfect, don't worry, but
we're
you're a
very
pretty good guy
open to
because of your
change,
practice.
but it does have to do with the environment, conditions,
Yes.
and
EBS being one of the conditions.
and the new conditions of this kind of connectivity is very novel for everybody, for the world. And it's really troublesome, but on the other hand, it goes the other way too. So, you know, sort of self-awareness and kindness and all that stuff can be very viral too, you know? So, that was sort of the gist of our kind of, we were wrestling with last week, but it's like the culture that includes the connectivity and the way that it's also these firestorms that happen, you know, and it seems so like a virus, you know, just, and, it's horrifying. And I just feel overwhelmed in the face of it, you know, but when we get into a nice little group like this,
It's different.
I feel much more optimistic.
I think to slightly modify, I think what's hardwired into us is not wanting to suffer. That I think is a high priority. We may not know what happiness is. In that sense, it's abstract, right? Happiness. But what we know for sure what suffering is, and we know for sure don't want. And that is what's universal, including those people on the other side. Like literally, right? Walk out of EBS, look across to the other side. Many of the people who work there, including them, you know, what makes them absolutely the same as us on this side is we don't want suffering. We don't want to be miserable. So now, the problem is not so much a problem of what we want or what we don't want is what we think can help us achieve what we want. And to be far away from what we don't want. So Buddha calls this wisdom, insight. Having or not having, insight. Having or not having, wisdom. So in a different context, he says that you need to cultivate boundless, meaning no strings attached, love and compassion. But that itself is not enough. That is the necessary fuel. That is the necessary kind of energy that you have to have. Boundless, unbiased, no strings attached compassion and love for all without exception. But that energy, that fuel, has to be guided by insight, understanding, wisdom. And so a text like Santideva, helps us clarify that. Again and again from different, angles. So all the different chapters. Yes, of course, each chapter sort of has its own, right, theme. But when you get right down to it, it's all helping us to think better. And in this text, thinking is not a bad thing. But thinking without guidance becomes a dangerous thing. So it's providing guidance. Then here and there it hints at, here and there it does hint at saying to us, okay, even as you're learning how to think better, right? Isn't that a motto for some business? Think better.
Probably.
IBM, right? Once upon a time where it existed.
I think
Yeah,
Starbucks,
probably.
I think so, yeah.
So here, in this text, Shantideva generally is helping us think better. But here and there, it will hint at when you are good at thinking better, then you should also understand that thinking has its limits. But don't throw out thinking. Just because, thinking has, brought a lot of trouble, brought a lot of stress, brought a lot of, wrong conclusions. Don't give up on thinking, because you can think better. And he's offering this, in this book, in 10 chapters. And then indirectly pointing to also the possibility of having achieved the ability to think better, then to become free of the traps that are involved in thinking.
I see as I read this so often how I agree with what's written and it makes sense and I'm grateful to it. And these lines about not being upset if somebody slanders me. And it's like, oh, that's great. I shouldn't be. And I know that if somebody started cussing at me in 5 seconds, I would be very disturbed.
Yes.
I just see this discrepancy in my understanding and my living of life.
Yes. And that's good. That means it's working. Because in 5 seconds, when someone does that to you, the hope is that then in 8 seconds, you catch yourself and go, oh, that's kind of silly.
So how do you keep that love and like how do you practice that love, keeping that love and compassion for that person that is cussing you out instead of, I mean, so the first thing you do is get angry, but then, you take that second to not get angry, but how do you keep that love and compassion for that person? Because it's easy to, walk away instead of getting mad in a sense, but to actually be compassionate and keep that love for the other person, it's just kind of on another level, I think.
Sure, of course. So first thing is do no harm, and then understand how our common response is actually doing harm. Not only doing harm, in fact, it's not doing that much harm to the other person when we get angry. It's mostly doing harm to ourselves. So Dalai Lama says, selfishness is not a problem. It's foolish selfishness that's a problem. Intelligent selfishness, which is what Shantideva teaches, intelligent selfishness is good for you and it's good for other people. So first, do no harm, right? If we sign on to the way the world tells us how we should respond, often it's unintelligent selfishness. Not always, but often, So first step is to do no harm and say, okay, I'm not going to harm myself. And Shantideva, right? If you were here last week, you'll see he gives examples of how, it's pointless. Yeah, he's trying to make the point, you getting upset is pointless. Right? You getting jealous is pointless. It's not as if when you get jealous, someone else's achievement mysteriously comes to you. It says it doesn't, so it's futile, it's pointless, right? He's kind of and he exaggerates, but he exaggerates to help us see the pointlessness of our normal reaction. Yeah. So he uses that. So first is do no harm, step away. Now, if you're able to do no harm, step away, that is good for that moment. But if we want to take it to the next level, it's step away, but don't look away. Often we step away and we look away. What happens when we look away is we lose the opportunity to further convince our own heart, our own mind, as to the wisdom of doing no harm. Yeah. So instead of trying to bite too big a chunk out of, oh, I need to be loving, I need to be compassionate. In fact, you can even leave that kind of on the side. Don't throw that out, Let that always be kind of informing your actions, at least intellectually, if not from the bottom of your heart yet. But we can start from the level of not wanting to do harm to ourselves in an intelligent way, and recognizing what makes it intelligent is also a way of not doing harm to yourself that will also result in not harming others. And so we take time to not look away. We look at the situation. But you have to do that seriously, but lightly. Seriously, but lightly. And the lightly is often coded in Buddhist texts as like a dream, like a magician's illusion. But to say that you should understand that this is like a dream, like a magician's illusion, is not to say this is absolutely not true. It says like a dream. It doesn't say a dream. It says like a magician's illusion, but it doesn't say this is a magician's illusion. So even almost working like a mantra, when you catch yourself, right? 3 seconds after you got upset when someone's, yelling at you, or someone's, accusing you of something you didn't do, or someone has betrayed you, it's quite normal to feel bad about that. If 3 seconds after that, 7 seconds after that, 3 minutes after that, 7 minutes after that, wherever you are on that day, because it changes too, right? Depending on what else is going on in your life, If things are all going really well, your capacity to be forgiving and not react is stronger. But if things didn't go right that day, makes it worse, right? To be able to see all these factors is to see the fragility of our responses to triggers. Then we can see that trigger is not really substantial. It's also, what's the word? It's also based on conditions. It's also conditional. Then this is what I mean by not looking away. Once because we don't want to lose the opportunity to help us see how conditional our responses are. So you don't need to be harsh with yourself that, oh, I was angry at that person. You don't need to be harsh when you understand how conditional your response was, even though unskillful. But like, if slightly things were different that day, I would not have reacted that way. And the more we train to see the conditional nature, which poetically is called like a dream, like a magician's illusion. In less poetic expression, is to see the conditionality of everything. Buddhist technical term, the dependent nature, the dependently arising nature of all experiences. Then we don't need to invest so much energy in liking or disliking, in picking and choosing. It doesn't, right? Again, caution. The goal is not to turn yourself, into a zombie. Like no more feelings. It's in the midst of feelings, you understand the conditional nature of feelings. Then you have freedom. You have more freedom. You have more opportunity to choose your reaction to things. Right now, we feel like we don't have much choice, But it's possible to have better ability to choose, and that comes from creating this understanding, deepening the understanding, and what otherwise we could also call to familiarize, to habituate. So in a way, we do encourage, like reading something like Shantideva again and again and again and again as reminders.
One of the things that resonated with us was the be like a log
Uh-huh.
that came up multiple sessions. And I
Yes.
interpret that, like you said, don't be a zombie. But I interpret it to mean give space between the stimulus and the response.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems to me that when you're still deep into the level one of the three levels you talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and I think probably all of us are,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not you, but all of the rest of us.
No,
Uh,
I'm same company,
and
on a good day.
one of the things that resonated with me is the fact that these are not linear, but that
Mm-hmm.
it kind of came to my realization that it's not like I'm going to master level one and move on to level two.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty clear I'm going to be working with level one for the rest of this life and probably for a few more.
Yeah, no,
And
but
who
it's
knows?
also not linear. Remember those levels. Yeah.
Well, that's the point. I'm also
Yeah.
doing reasonably well at level two,
Yes,
perhaps better at level two than I am at level one, quite frankly.
yes, they're not linear, but they mutually inform each other. It's
So
more,
anyhow, that was something that this idea of respond like a log, that was probably the one thing out of this book that resonated with the group more than, and perhaps any other single thing.
mm-hmm. Act, but don't react. Yeah, act, but don't react. Because right now, when we react, it's the programming of the mental defilements. It's often that. So right now, every time we react, we we try to catch ourselves, before too long. Say, that's another, reaction programmed by the mental defilements. Veneration, praise, and fame serve not to increase merit or my lifespan, bestowing neither health nor strength, and nothing for the body's ease. If I'm wise in what is good for me, I'll ask what benefit these bring. What is the real value, right, of veneration, praise, and fame, except for this kind of ambiguous feeling good about it? And it says, but if I'm wise, I would, pause and say, well, does that really, bring me what I want? Then he says, for if it is entertainment that I desire, then I might as well resort to Netflix and video games. So here it says alcohol and cards, basically, yes. Netflix and video games, I lose my life, my wealth I squander, all for reputation's sake, right? What use are words, and whom will they delight when I'm dead and in my grave? Of course, you can always argue against, You're like, well, my reputation would ensure, right, that I keep my job, and yeah, sure, of course, on that level, no arguments. Again, Shantideva does exaggerate but his exaggeration is to bring into focus, right, the absurdity of the way we behave, in reaction to something that happens. Children can't help crying when their sand castles come crumbling down. Who are these children? We are these children. My mind is so like them when praise and reputation start to fail. So one Buddhist teacher says, that his teacher used to tell him, every time someone praises you, try to remember you can easily find 10 other people who will criticize you. And every time someone criticizes you, you can also probably find 10 people that will praise you. And then be done with both. Short-lived sound, devoid of intellect, can never in itself intend to praise me. I say that it's the joy that others take in me. It is this that is the cause of my delight. But what is it to me if others take delight in someone else or even in myself? Their pleasures is theirs and theirs alone. And no part of it actually comes to me. So, this is good for those of us who like people to like us. I can put myself in that group, so conflict adverse, because don't like people to not like, Then he said, if people like you, so they experience pleasure when they see you, right? Well, that pleasure has nothing to do with you. Why do you get so committed to? Now, again, I think, if you really discuss with the Santideva, he's not going to dismiss, right, the practical reasons to a degree, to want to avoid people not liking you and to want to have people like you. But often we do those things as if, at least in that moment, that's all that matters. That we will go to extreme lengths. And that is when, comparable to how at one point what we now call tribalism made some kind of sense. But that coding has come down to us now, mostly serving very little purpose. If I'm happy at the joy of those who take delight, then everyone should be a source of joy to me. When people take delight in others, why am I not happy at their pleasure? So if you say, oh, yes, I simply enjoy, I simply want everyone to have delight in their mind when they come across anyone. So he says, then, why is it that you're only concerned? That when they are not happy with you, you are concerned? You should also be concerned when they are not happy with other people. And likewise, if you enjoy that they are happy with you, and recognizing that when they're happy with you, it's a joy that they experience, why don't you want them to be happy with everyone? And he's saying, that's often not how we work. And this is pointing to what we normally call jealousy or envy. The satisfaction that is mine from thinking I am being praised is unacceptable to common sense and nothing but the antics of a silly child. This is kind of based on the discussion that has come before. Yeah. It says, if you understand, what we have been discussing so far, you'll see, how childish, how ephemeral this liking to be praised actually is. Praise and compliments distract me, sapping my revulsion with samsara. And so these are distractions too, that distract us from truly seeing, right? What are the real threats? What is really pressing? And what is just like distractions, that divide us? I start to envy others their good qualities, and thus all excellence is ruined. So it says that, when we start to envy others and their good fortune and their good qualities, in a subtle way, what happens is we also inhibit the ability of those qualities, of those good fortune to arise in our hearts, in our experience. And that is often pointed out as one of the dangers of jealousy and envy. It's like in an interdependent way. We cut off, we impede the ability of those things from arising in us. Like attracts like, the principle of that. So if we see others, talent, if we see others' wealth, and we become envious, it says that it will impede our ability to experience the same kind of wealth, the same kind of talent. Those who stay close by me then to damage my good name and cut me down to size are surely there protecting me from falling into realms of grief. And so this is kind of like a quote unquote unnatural kind of turn of things. He says, can you see? Can you kind of shift your perspective so that, not that, you want the people close to you to damage your good name or to cut you down. No, we all don't want that. But what he's saying is like, but when that happens, can you change your attitude to, instead of like, why do you do this? How unfair this is? How ungrateful you are, and all of that. How can you betray me? Can you put that aside and at least, I would say, this is me, not Santideva, I would say, how I try to practice this is at least in that moment recognize for the purposes of, training my mind so that I'm not instinctively just addicted to when people praise, I like, when people blame, I don't like. This is the opportunity. Then, especially if you're in a workplace, right? I think this doesn't mean that you cannot, right, or you should not seek justice. When you have been wronged, it doesn't, it doesn't have to mean, that you turn into a doormat to be bullied by others. But it's applying that principle of do no harm. First, see that your instinct to retaliate is actually harming you. And then address the problem at the level where it needs to be addressed. Would be how I would say to take this. In other contexts, for example, right? If you certainly, someone in an abusive relationship, I would not say, oh, just look at your own mind. No, yes, first step, look at your own mind, see how you can protect it, and then simultaneously, right? Figure out how to stop and not continue to be in an abusive situation. And have some understanding for the one causing the abuse, the conditionality of their situation. But then it doesn't exclude, stopping the harm, stopping the abuse. So I think today we stop here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we need to talk to you about your visit in July, but we can do that.
Yeah, let's what did we even talk about dates, or am I?
Yeah, we have the last weekend in July.
Okay, let's yeah, us three. Let's see if we
Three.
yes.
And then we can do it in email or something, but I just want to say that EBS in general, we're getting a lot of people wanting help with cultivating compassion. In this time, everyone seems to recognize that it's a good reaction, but maybe not an easy reaction.
Yeah.
So I think a Mahayana oriented, compassion practice was very much appreciated. But we'll talk.
Yeah, I think guarding our heart
Yeah.
lies at the root of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I hope you feel better and get plenty of rest.
Yeah. So excellent and precious bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rest of Sunday. Bye bye.